Hey, what's going on everyone? So today we're going to take a look at the Anbernic RG353P, and I want to thank Anbernic for sending me a review copy of it. Now this might actually be a successor to my favorite Anbernic handheld, which is the RG351P. Now I know the form factors are not exactly the same, but I think fans of the RG351P will be interested to hear about some of the performance and feature upgrades that you get with the 353P. So what I want to do in today's video is do an unboxing and talk a little bit about the specs of this device, and then I want to talk about why this handheld and this form factor has really won me over, which I did not expect. And then I want to focus in on the Android side of things today in this video. So we'll be talking about some features on Android that you might not get on Linux, and then finally we'll finish it up with some game performance in Android. Now Linux fans, don't worry, I will do another video on Linux. Okay, so if you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Alright, let's do the unboxing. Okay, so we'll put the handheld aside for just a second. Now, most of these Anbernic devices come with pretty much the same thing, so I won't spend too long on this. You get a USB-C cable, get a manual, and I've shown you the manual before. This time it comes in a little bit of color. There's a Chinese version and a English version. Wet wipes. There is a screen protector, which I have not put on yet. Sometimes you'll get an option to select if you want an SD card with a bunch of ROMs on it. They send this to me anyway, so we'll be testing our device with these ROMs. By the way, there is an affiliate link in the description below that takes you to the official Anbernic store on AliExpress, so if you want to support the channel, make sure you use that link below. Okay, so here's the device itself. Before we talk about it, let's first talk about the tech specs, and then we'll come back and talk about the handheld. So if you've been watching the videos, you'll know that the last handheld that I reviewed was the Anbernic RG503, and that actually has the same processor as this handheld, which is the Rockchip 3566. This has 4 A55 cores at 1.8 GHz. The GPU is a Mali G52. Now I wasn't able to get the clock speed for this GPU because when I opened up CPU Float there was no information there, but I'm led to believe that the maximum clock speed for the GPU is about 850 MHz. So there's 2 GB of LPDDR4 RAM, there's 32 GB of internal storage, and Android 11 boots off this internal storage. The screen is a 3.5-inch IPS display. It has 640 by 480 resolution, and this is a 4:3 aspect ratio, so it's going to be great for all of those older 8-bit, 16-bit and 32-bit retro games. This handheld also features dual boot operating systems, so if you're a Linux fan, you can load Linux onto a micro SD card and boot off that. There's a 3500 mAh battery, probably good for about 3 to 4 hours of gameplay, and probably lower if you're going to be playing something more intensive like Dreamcast. And when you charge this device, don't use a fast charger, just use something up to 5 volts 2 amps. That will be more than enough to charge this handheld. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the form factor, and obviously this resembles an SNES controller with a screen in the middle. Now this may be something that people like or dislike, and it may be a little bit divisive, but personally it's really grown on me, and I want to try and explain why. And I think a lot of it has to do with the design and craftsmanship of the device, and this isn't a word that I really like to use, but a lot of people like to talk about these products as knockoffs or clones, but these really are not knockoffs and clones. These are really beautifully designed devices, which is why we're fans of them and why we collect them. And so you can really tell with this device that it's been beautifully designed, and there's a lot of big things that's being considered in the design of this device. So firstly, you've got the stack shoulder button. So finally, Anbernic has listened to all of us in the reviews talking about stack shoulder buttons, and they feel really good to press down on. And another thing with this design, with the curves of this device, now it actually fits a little bit nicer when you use the shoulder buttons. around your fingers and your hands. Whereas I think if you go back to the RG351P, it's a little bit more awkward and it doesn't fit as nicely, even though the design is very beautiful. So there's a reason why, in terms of function at least, why these curves are useful on this body. Now the next thing is that there are a lot of face buttons as well, which I really like. So I really like the position of these select and start buttons, whereas some other handhelds will have it on the bottom here. And so these are a lot easier to reach versus the buttons at the bottom. There's also function and power buttons, which are a little bit indented, so you won't accidentally press them, but I really like the fact that they're here on the front of the device rather than on the bottom of the device or on the side of the device. And as you can see, there are no buttons on the sides anymore because your hands and your fingers are going to be wrapped nicely around there. So you don't want to be accidentally touching anything on the sides. And lastly, because of the curves of this body, it's a little bit easier now to access the analog stick, so it feels more comfortable to use this, both of these analog sticks. Whereas it was a little bit harder on the RG351P. It was at the bottom there, and it was, even though it's not too bad, but definitely on something like the RG552, it was a little bit harder to reach that analog stick and also reach for the L1 and L2 buttons. So I really like how the form factor is actually useful for making it more comfortable to play on this device. So one other comparison I do want to make, and this wasn't something I expected, but it actually looks very similar to a PlayStation Vita, except the Anbernic RG353P has that notch there. So it both has very similar curves on the side. It has the D-pad and face buttons at the top there with analog sticks. The Vita has select and start at the bottom there. But I do think it has a lot of very similar design cues, and both are very comfortable to use as well. So if comfort's a thing, definitely consider checking out the RG353P. So I was very interested to see how this screen compares to other Anbernic devices. To make this comparison as similar as possible, I'm using RetroArch, the same emulator and the same color palette. So going into this comparison, I always felt the RG503 with the OLED screen was quite saturated in terms of colors, as you can tell here. And the RG552 I always felt also had strong colors as well. The RG351P I always felt was my favorite screen because even though the colors were a little bit lighter, I felt like it replicated the color of the sky to the shade of blue that I like the most. So on the 351P, you may notice there's a bit of an issue with the refresh rate syncing up with the camera there, but that's not an issue off camera. With the RG353P, I did feel like the sky was a little bit purplish in color, but actually it doesn't look too bad when you put them all up against each other like this. But overall, I think the RG353P is a happy medium between the very light colors of the 351P and the very dark colors of the RG503. So the next thing I want to mention is that on the RG503, there are very dark blacks because of course it's an OLED screen. So if you're going to be playing games with a black background like Balloon Fight, then that would be useful to have. So on the RG351P, you can definitely see the lighter shades of color, particularly in the walls here where it's more white, and on the other three systems it's a little bit more yellow. Also on the RG503, the background is a lot more red. So I really like the colors on the RG503 in Castlevania here. The colors are a lot more vibrant. However, in something like Super Mario Bros, the colors are a little bit too strong for me, so it's a little bit hit and miss. And once again, the RG353P screen seems to be a happy medium between these two. Okay, let's do one more screen comparison. We've got Super Mario World here, and as you can see, the colors on the RG351P are a lot lighter, and this is especially noticeable when you look at the bushes in the background there. The colors are a lot deeper and darker on the OLED screen. So while I've got all of these handhelds out, I thought it'd be interesting to measure the screen size, and the RG353P measures 3.4 inches, and the RG351P, which is a 3:2 aspect ratio, measures 3.2 inches. So it's a little bit smaller, but not overly so. So in this video, I just want to focus in on Android because I'll be able to do it in a little bit more detail, and in my next video, I will look at Linux. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, this is not a feature, but I thought I would put it in here. There's no Google App Play Store by default, and to add it, you have to root it. I'll leave details below on a video on how you can do that, but you do need to root this in order to install Play Store. So without the Play Store, you can still go into Chrome and just download whatever Android software that you find. For example, I downloaded Redream, the Dreamcast emulator, because it wasn't included. However, I found that the performance of this was not really that great, and playing Dreamcast on Linux was a lot faster, so you may want to just do a clean install of Android. So one feature that hasn't been implemented yet in Linux is Mini HDMI Out, and this works just fine by default on Android. So if you hook up a PlayStation controller or any other type of controller, and the controller also works in Bluetooth as well if you're wondering, then you can just hook this up to a monitor and you can have a console-like experience. So there's Bluetooth 4.2 available as well, and it works really well here. So I've got my PS4 controller hooked up and also my AirPods, but you might be able to think of other things like a keyboard and mouse, for example, and that could work as well. Wireless headphones is definitely a huge upgrade for any of these devices around $100. On Android, the touchscreen works by default, so you'll be able to play all of your DS games, whereas on the stock Linux firmware, the touchscreen doesn't work right now. There's a Moonlight streaming app included on Android, and it's also included on Linux as well, so you'll be able to stream all of your games from your PC. So because the screen is very small, it won't be that great for a lot of modern PC games, but there will be some games that you'll be able to make use of. For example, Sonic Mania looks really great on this screen. This is Resident Evil 3, a game that I just finished on PC, and I thought I would take this opportunity to do a quick plug for my second channel, Oh My Games, and if you like Let's Plays and reviews, make sure to go over there and check out that channel. I'll leave a link in the description below. Okay, bonus material time, and this is live TV streams via Kodi. You might be wondering why I'm showing this, but on the SD card that they provided, the one with all of the ROMs on it, if you go to the Anbernic directory, you'll be able to find a playlist of a lot of live TV stream channels. So there's mostly a lot of the free TV stream stuff that you can get quite easily on the internet, like Al Jazeera and Deutsche Welle and France 24. So this isn't a device that I would typically watch live TV on, but it is doable. Okay, let's talk about game performance, and I've got a whole range of systems here, all the way from NES to Dreamcast. And of course the NES games works just fine. This is Legend of Zelda. I decided to turn the music off just in case they hit me with a copyright. This is The Legend of Kage, a game that I played a lot as a child, but I don't think it really holds up that well anymore, but it is still really cool to be able to jump all over the place. So on this device, I thought I would mostly test out the standalone emulators. So you could play this on RetroArch, but I'm using the gbc.emu standalone emulator that they provided, and it seems to work fine. One thing about the Gameboy emulator though is that it doesn't seem like the color palettes were working very well, so I wasn't able to turn on different color palettes for Gameboy. For GBA, I'm using the gba.emu emulator, and for Pokemon Leaf Green it runs just fine. So GBA is a 3:2 aspect ratio for the screen size, and I always was of the opinion it didn't matter too much on the RG351P, so I didn't upgrade to the RG351MP, which had a 4:3 screen. But after using the 4:3 aspect ratio screen size here, I do think a 4:3 aspect ratio is a little bit more useful for a lot more retro systems. whereas the 351P is really only perfect for 3x2 Game Boy Advance games. Who would have thought that growing up you could play SNES games on an SNES inspired controller? I certainly wouldn't have. I think Anbernic have pulled something special off here because the handheld is very charming and very fun to use. And just like the Anbernic RG351P, where I found it gave me joy to actually just use the handheld, the RG353P does the same thing. Okay, so this is Blue's Journey on Neo Geo, and I used to see this on the arcades all the time, but I never really played it that much, so I'm really bad at this game. This is King of Fighters 2002. Now the music is actually missing here. I'm not sure why. It could be because of the emulator, or it could be because of the ROM. So with Dreamcast, Redream was not pre-installed, so I just downloaded it and installed it myself, but for some reason it feels very slow here. Now Dead or Alive 2 is actually one of the more intensive games that also doesn't work on the RG503, but I tested a lot of Dreamcast games and they all seem to be hovering around 40 to 45 FPS for some reason. On the other hand, there are some games that feel quite playable, like Crazy Taxi 2, but I still have about 45 FPS. For Saturn, I ran into some problems. Yabe Sanshiro 2 was pre-installed on the system, but it didn't work, so I deleted it and installed my own. I was only able to get one game to work, which was Nights into Dreams. All of my other ROMs didn't work. Okay, on to Nintendo 64. I used the pre-installed New Pen 64 Plus FC Pro emulator, and all of these games just work fine, so I feel like Nintendo 64 could be very good on the system. Obviously, I probably need to test more games, but right now, after having tested Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64, they all feel like they run pretty great. Nintendo DS is a very interesting one because while all of these games run fine performance-wise, it's not very practical to be playing dual screen touchscreen gaming on a 3.5-inch screen device. So when you shrink that screen size down, it actually makes it more difficult for the touchscreen to detect all of your movements accurately. So a lot of the touches just won't register. It generally works fine full screen, but there are games where you have to switch backwards and forwards between the two and it can get a little bit annoying. So if you're trying to decide between the RG503 and the 353P because they have the same processor, well, there's no contest in terms of PSP, definitely pick the RG503. While the game performance is mostly the same as the 503, the game experience is way different because now the screen size is a lot smaller. It's actually smaller than a regular PSP, so a lot of the text and things like that are going to feel like it's squashed. So the Rockchip 3566 isn't the perfect processor for PSP emulation because I think it still needs a lot more power to play your whole PSP library. So it can definitely play a lot of it, but just not all of it. So games like Tekken 6, as you just saw there, run at 30 FPS instead of its native 60 FPS. Games like Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories runs at a native 30 FPS, so these feel quite fine on this processor. So lastly, just to finish up, I've got some PlayStation games on DuckStation. This is Ridge Racer 4, and it runs pretty well, no issues here. And if you can't play Tekken 6 on PSP, well, you can play Tekken 3, which runs at full screen at a full 60 FPS here. Okay, let's wrap things up, and I really like the Anbernic RG353P. Now, in terms of game performance, it doesn't completely blow me away, so I've used other handhelds that have more performance than this, and this is really good for 8-bit, 16-bit, and 32-bit gaming. So if you like that sort of thing, I think this is where it's going to excel at. It's going to allow you to play a little bit more of your PSP and Dreamcast library, but it's not going to let you play the full PSP and Dreamcast library. So just be aware of that if you get this device. Now in terms of form factor, this has really won me over. I did not expect this, but the curves on this makes it very comfortable to use this. So much so that I do think I might be using this a little bit more than the RG351P. And that's going to remain one of my favorite handhelds of all time, but I'm really starting to like this RG353P. Now in terms of features, there's a lot of things that they've added to this. So there's the dual boot operating system, so you've got Android and Linux, and there's going to be a lot of custom firmwares, I'm sure, that are going to be coming down in the future for this. And so there's a lot of stuff here for you to tinker around with. Some of the features are a little bit half-baked, like for example the Moonlight streaming is it's a little bit small on that 3.5-inch screen, so it's not that great for streaming. And also for touchscreen gaming like DS gaming, it is very small to fit 2 screens on there and do touchscreen gaming on there, so it's not really recommended, but it is there if you wanted to play around with that. Okay, so that's going to be it for this one. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys in the next one.